like we get upset with people in the way they are, but they're also reacting back to the way that we are or whatever we're presenting. And then what happens is neither party is actually listening to the other, but we are just coming from that reaction point. And we do that a lot with our children. And our children, to me, are our best teachers if we are willing to learn and grow.
Welcome to Imperfect Momming. Our children are constantly looking to us for examples. The term role model doesn't quite cut it here. We are shaping their worldview with every move we make. You see, it's not in the lectures we give or moments where we are actively attempting to teach them. It's in the micro movements we make, the unconscious ways in which we navigate life. We are constantly teaching our children how to show up for themselves, their friends, their future partners, and even their future children. So what can we do to ensure we are raising thoughtful, compassionate, self-aware human beings? We have to become them ourselves. No one is perfect, but we can still all be better, and it starts with self-healing. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to Imperfect Momming, and we have a very special guest today. I didn't confirm how you say your name. Is it Marilou?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Perfect. So, whichever way you want to say it, actually, just, yeah.
I'm that way too. And then anytime somebody says my name wrong, my son's like, no, your name's Alicia. And I'm like, so tell us who you are and what you do.
Hey, everyone, and thank you, Alicia, for having me on here. What a beautiful connection this is. So my name is Marilou, and first and foremost, I actually am a mother of two beautiful boys, aged 11 and 13. Yay, walking hormone stage. I'm going all through it at the moment. A little bit about me. Gosh, how far back do I go? In a nutshell, I came out to Australia. So I'm from Australia, guys. That big, island-looking continent thing on the map. But I have lived in the US before, and I love it. But I was born in Lebanon, and I came out to Australia with my family when I was 10 years old. And I didn't like being here. I didn't want to speak English. I grew up very much in a French environment, French school. Arabic and French were my first languages. Anyway, we came out here with the big sole purpose for my family for us to have an education. Being in a war-torn country, schools were often closed down. Family members that attempted to go to university would start, but then everything would get locked down and shut down. So no one in my family actually got to finish a degree. And so I'm the first. And that's a big deal for me because I'm also female. So that actually means even more in my culture, in my original culture. So I went to uni and I did a Bachelor of Social Science, learning all about psychology and sociology. And I love understanding how humans behave, what makes us operate the way that we do. But the funny thing is, I did this degree, 3-year degree, and I didn't want to be a psychologist anymore. I really did not agree with what was expected of us as psychologists. And at that time at 19, I went to a psychologist when my parents broke up, and it actually caused more trauma for me to deal with. And I just didn't agree with the whole process. So I kind of dumped that and got into the travel industry and went on to live in the US, went on to live in Brazil, in the UK. I've traveled quite extensively around the world. And I lived a really good life, and everything was based around travel and events in my work. And then I came back to Australia at 28, settling down, met my husband, or my ex now, but my husband at the time. And I wanted to go back to uni and get my master's in education. And I wanted to always be a teacher. And I've always loved working with young children. But I didn't get in. And I got pregnant around the same time. So it's beautiful how life, whatever it is that you want to believe in, whether it's God or a higher source or the universe, all I know is that higher source knows better sometimes than what we think we want. because I was so upset. I was so upset not getting into my master's and, having to reshift my focus. But that was the most beautiful experience, because having my first, and I've got to tell you something about me, I was always the baby whisperer. So if I picked up a baby, I was fine with their crying. I would soothe them. I would calm them down. It didn't frazzle me at all. I love children. I love babies in particular. And yet, when I had my first, it was a really tough pregnancy. He was 6 weeks early. It took 4 days with his labor. It was really quite traumatic for both of us. And after he was born, I spiraled down into quite heavy postnatal depression and anxiety more so. I was always on edge. I was quite highly anxious, second guessing myself, never knowing if I'm doing the right thing. I was a mess. I was really a mess. And I actually, in that point in my life, also came, it was after I had his brother. So 2 years later, I had, my second boy, and I kind of spiraled down a little bit into that whole, who am I and what's my identity? And, I friggin' went to uni, and here I am just wiping nappies, like cleaning nappies all the time kind of mentality. And I did spiral down where I got to a point where I understood. And before this, I really judged mothers who would take their children's life and their own life. But it got so bad for me that I actually got to understand why a mother would do that. And that was the biggest gift and probably shift for me, where I really went back to my roots of psychology and my own personal development, and got that further training in neuro-linguistic programming, in life coaching, and brought it all together and started working. Well, I wanted to start working with children to begin with, but then through my research found out I needed to work with the mums. So I did work with mums for a while, because, when I shifted my energy and worked with my own PND, everything shifted for my boys anyway. And, to the mothers on your show that are listening to this, I think it's so important they know that, if they go inwards and shift the rubble and clear the dust that's going on inside here, the cobwebs within them, the shift for their children is massive. Yeah. But what I do now, like just fast forward now, almost 10 years on, I have built my business pre-COVID, going into schools and working with kids and yoga and mindfulness and shifting their mindset with body work through doing yoga. But it's a lot more than just yoga, because it's very somatic and it's all about coming back into the body. And now I work with mainly teenagers on helping them with some dark and deep issues. Like I've kind of progressed from soft skills to now, even delving into suicide and self-harm, and helping them really understand why they feel the way they feel, how their brain works. And this is my whole analogy around it. And I know it's the mothers in particular. And in this, I really want to say this. I'm not putting that weight and blame on mothers. It's not your sole responsibility. However, we as women are so powerful. We are so intuitive. We have got so much goodness in this makeup that we do have the power to not only shift the family dynamics, but we can shift stuff in the world. Like I really do believe that. And so rather than seeing it as weight on your shoulders, see it as a superpower and a responsibility of I shift me, I shift my children, right? Yeah. And so even though I'm really focused on the children now, because that's where my passion lies and it's needed for your audience, like I definitely recommend mothers to, especially, those that want to bring their kids to come see me and fix their children. Let's fix you first. Like, let's look at you first and help you first.
I love that you said that, because I'm going to tell you something that happened today that I was going to do a video on it later on. But I have a friend, her name's Katie, and we use this app called Marco Polo. And it's basically like FaceTime, but you leave video messages for each other. So you're not live, but you're videoing, you're videoing back and forth.
Yeah, right.
So usually it says the person's name on, at the top, and it has a little picture of them. So you know who you're talking to. And so all of a sudden, Katie's name changed to Yolande. And I kept saying I sent her a polo, and I said, Katie, how come you're Yolande all of a sudden? And she didn't respond to that. And then the next day she sent me another message. And then I was like, no, Katie, seriously, how come you're Yolande now? Like, I don't understand why you're Yolande. And she goes, my name's Katie, and you could call me Kate, but my name's not Yolande. And so I sent her a screenshot of what I'm seeing on my end. And I went into my contacts, because that's where Polo pulls people's names from. And I realized that I had merged her with someone else whose name was Yolande. And when I merged the contacts, it was Katie in my contact, but it was Yolande in Polo. And I just had this thought. I was like, so often we sit here and we yell at people for how come you're behaving this way, when really they're reacting to the way that we are. And I feel like that's the point that you're making. Like, when you change, there's my favorite line of Big Fat Greek Wedding is the man. Do you remember that movie?
I love that movie.
Yeah. And I'm Armenian, so it like hits home so hard. Like, so they said the man is the head of the household, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn that head any way she wants, right?
Yes, 100%. And we really do. And that power really lies within. And I love what you just said in regards to people. Like, we get upset with people in the way they are, but they're also reacting back to the way that we are, or whatever we're presenting. And then what happens is neither party is actually listening to the other, but we are just coming from that reaction point. And we do that a lot with our children. And our children, to me, are our best teachers if we are willing to learn and grow, because I see my boys and they do it to me all the time. So I am a life coach. I've got a background in psychology. I've worked as a youth worker in Indigenous organizations. Like, I know all this stuff, and they go, oh, do you really, Mum? Let me just push that button and let me freaking trigger you, and let's see if you really practice what you know.
Listen,
and that's that growth.
Nobody can trigger you like your children. Like, there's nobody. And there's my very favorite book. I talk about it all the time on the podcast, and I haven't actually ever read it. I just love the concept of it, but it's called Parenting from the Inside Out. And it is a personal development book disguised as a parenting book. Like, it is all about you healing your wounds so that your kids don't trigger those.
100%. And I agree with you. Like, there are two things where the most growth happens to a person is when you're in a relationship, because you can be the most wonderful person, but as soon as you get into a relationship, you've got the triggers and the stuff the traumas that come up that you never even knew were there, that resurface to be cleared. And with children, they are the ones that go right into your inner child stuff, to your mother wounds, to your friend wounds, what it was like. Like, I see so many parents that bring their teenagers to me, and their child's going through anxiety, or their child is going through some issue at school with friends or whatever. And my first question is, what was it like for you in high school, to the parents? And 9 out of 10 times, the parents went through the same thing that their child is now going through. And all I see that is a gift that the child is giving you to go, I will clean my stuff, and then my child will be okay. And I can attest to this because I've done the same thing with my own children. Yeah, when they've had issues with friendships, like what I shared with you about coming here when I was 10. I was bullied for a good 5 years. I hated this country for a good 5 years. I didn't have friends. I didn't speak English. Like, it was tough, right? And then at a similar age, my boy started going through something very similar, and I caught on to it really quickly. I'm like, right, I'm going to go in, what you just said, parent myself from the inside out, heal my own crap. And then guess what? My child's problem just went away.
Yeah.
Actually went away.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I heard a quote that said, if you don't address your childhood wounds, your marriage will.
100%.
And I added, so will parenting.
100%.
100%.
100%. And, only in the last year, I really, just through some really deep personal work that I've done for myself, I've come to realize, because, maybe about a year and a half ago, I was seeing a lot of troubled teenagers. The pandemic has left another type of pandemic with mental health for our young people. And especially in Victoria, where I'm living in Australia, we had a really harsh lockdowns with 5-kilometer radius and, curfews and a whole bunch of stuff. Like, it was really quite traumatic for our young people who wanted to break the law, but were scared of getting in trouble and all sorts of things, like to meet their needs and values. So it was a really interesting time, but I also had my own stuff come up of, oh my gosh, my kids were starting, especially my eldest, starting to step into that teenage phase of development. And I had a thing going, like, how are people going to send their kids to see me when, my child is going through this and, I can't help them like the way I want to right now. But there's two things to that. My child, your child at that age will never listen to you. They won't. Developmentally, they are pulling away from the nest. And in that age group, they are starting to create their own identity. It is all about the identity stage of who am I. So if a parent might say this, the child may also say the opposite, just because they want to pull away and create their own identity, not just because mum and dad said, like, the earlier stages.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened for me is I went, who the heck am I to stop my own child going through their own development so that my business would look good?
Mm.
And here I am teaching parents about their child's development and the child about their own development and how to feel empowered. And my job really is to have a coach do that for my child if he doesn't want to listen to me, and make sure that he is surrounded with mentors. And so I've been very blessed. Like, we've got amazing football coaches, and, my kids do karate and their sensei is phenomenal. And like, I've got all these amazing male mentors in particular for my boys. And if you had girls, do the female mentors around them, like the aunties and the, teachers or whatever. Because it's so important at that stage with our children. But I also realize my biggest job as a parent is not to stop my children from having their own traumas.
Mm.
They will have, that's the human experience. But my job as a parent is to make sure I don't pass on my own traumas to them. And again, it goes back to what you said of healing ourselves from, like, parenting from the inside out.
Yeah. That it goes back to, and I talk about this almost every single episode on the podcast, and I'm sure people are tired of hearing it, but unless you have it, I'm going to still talk about it. So we need community.
Oh my gosh, yes. I actually did a video about this yesterday with everything that's going on in Lebanon right now. My mother and stepdad, my stepdad, full Aussie born, like Australian bred and, born and grown here. And he loves being in Lebanon. They've been living there now for 6 months, despite the war and despite what's happening over there. And when I ask him, I'm like, I just don't get it. Like, people normally want to get out of countries like that and come to places like Australia. What makes you want to go there and stay there? And he's like, the community. The man in the supermarket invited me to have coffee with him, and I can't even speak Arabic and he can barely speak English, but we just find our way. And and the lady up the road brought us this cake and welcomed us into the village. And it is about community. And I'm sorry to say this, Western world, I've lived in a lot of Western countries like UK, US, Australia. I'm sure Canada would be the same. We do not have community in the way that we need to thrive. And we are not meant to do this gig alone.
No,
we are not. And I don't know, did you like grow up in an Armenian culture at all?
Not particularly. Like, there is an Armenian hub here where I live. But I think like my grandparents were 100%, and like both of them were born here, but they were like first generation born here. Their parents were straight off the boat. My great grandmother was orphaned in the Armenian genocide. And so we had our family, but there wasn't a whole lot of the rest of the community that I was
you didn't grow up
to.
exactly, so you weren't exposed to that, whereas I grew up with that in Lebanon. I had the aunties, I had the grandparents. So you know, when people ask me about growing up in war and trauma, because I do focus quite a bit on trauma and understanding trauma with a different lens, and especially having worked in an Indigenous organization in Australia and like having a look at the trauma there, but I do give it a different type of lens of like trauma. So when I grew up in the war, a lot of people go, how did you deal with that trauma? But for me, so we lived in a building in eight stories, right, high. And when we would go in the bunker, when, you know, missiles and stuff were flying overhead, I didn't focus on the missile as a child, but I focused on getting so excited. I was having a sleepover with all the kids in the building, and I got to eat all the other parents' food. And it was like we're having one massive sleepover. And because community was so strong. And so isn't it interesting that when we bring in that, and I'm so happy that you do say this on your episodes quite often about the community, and this is just to give that further evidence to you on a larger scale of, you know, even when you are in a war, in a traumatic kind of experience, that community can take away, or maybe not even fully take away, but can lessen the trauma to the war because of the power of that community. And that's what I remember as a child. You know, I don't remember the missiles as much as I remember the sleepovers and all the great food and just being around with all the other kids from the building. And we were huddled together for days. But I like the mums in there, the mums especially, because some of the dads were away, but the mums especially were what held us together and made the kids feel very safe.
Yeah.
So that says a lot, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the power. Like I obviously haven't experienced that. Well, maybe not obviously, but I haven't experienced that. But I love that that's your example of the power of community, because like you could be a totally different person if your mom and dad were just their unit with your siblings and that was it. And you know, that's like, there is power in our family, but there's so much like, but back to what you were saying earlier is like our kids need, especially in that teenage years where they're pulling away, they need that other influence. And that's a biological thing. I know it's a developmental thing, but it is a biological thing, because that way, like, there's not the incest of being around just your family, that you go out and spread your seed with other people. So it's like a biological thing, but it's also, you know, a developmental thing. So I love all of that. And just kind of being cognizant of time, I would love to know what your if you have a piece of advice that you want to share with moms.
I
know it's a loaded question.
I know, right? Okay, so my latest piece of advice, and you know, I'm 46 years young, and this is my thing, is many of us wait until midlife crisis to kind of really start our personal development journey, or, you know, really go into the crisis. So I see it as a midlife crisis or a midlife awakening. And the reason I work with children in particular, even though, you know, through even just that conversation, I know it's the mums that really need that support. But this is how I see things, is most of us wait until 30s, 40s, mainly our 40s, to kind of start this journey. Yeah. And it is, again, a very developmental thing. However, just think of us, all of us, like when we first started off, we were this little sprout, this little seed. And as time goes, we grow and grow and grow into this onion. Now, what I love doing is coming in and giving the tools that most people learn when they're 40s and 50s and having that midlife crisis. I love giving those tools to kids when they're quite young. So start here. And I say, it doesn't mean that the crap ain't going to happen in your life, because it will. I promise you that, because that's life's journey as well. And that's part of the growth. But it doesn't have to be so bad if you have those tools. Why wait until you're 40 and 50 to learn about boundaries with your friends or people, and who takes your energy? Why wait until your 40s and 50s to learn how to love yourself? And so for me, the biggest thing I learned in the last 18 months for me is to fully love myself. And my one advice for moms is that if you want your child to be confident, to be well-spoken, to be educated, to be calm, to be free of anxiety, mums, please, please do that for yourself first.
Yeah. I haven't said this on the podcast in a long time, so I'm going to say it. Your children are not watching the show or listening to, your children are watching the show. They're not listening to the lecture. So if you're telling them as mom, you got to love yourself and you got to set boundaries and you got to, make sure other people are treating you with kindness, but you're calling yourself stupid all the time and beating yourself up and not having boundaries of your own.
Yeah.
They're learning that. I'm not going to say that they don't listen to the lecture, because I think they do that too, but they, like my mother-in-law, my ex-mother-in-law, but she's my mother-in-law. She told me once, I know what you do in your home because your son does it when he's here. And I was like, oh Lord, what is he doing? And but then I started noticing, oh my gosh, why can nobody put their shoes away? How come he always just takes his shoes off and leaves them in the middle of the living room? And then I was like, well, there's my husband's shoes and there's my shoes and there's another one of my husband's and there's another one of mine. Okay, got it. He's watching the show. Good. And then I started putting my shoes away and he's started putting his shoes away.
Yeah.
And it's a totally, when you work on yourself, everyone benefits. And I think that's kind of, yeah.
100%, 100%. And I just invite mothers as well to remember there is that fine line now as we're speaking about it, because I do delve quite a lot with this in my coaching, that there's this fine line. I mean, I've got 2 boys and they could be no more than chalk and cheese, and they grew up in a very similar environment. But when we start understanding the stuff about our structure of reality and our perception and belief system of the world, we also need to realize that our children, they may come from us, but they're not us. Yeah. And so they are also their own little spirit and soul and human, having this human experience and their own journey that they need to go through. And like I said before, our job is not to stop our children from having those learning experience and these traumas. Of course, we're here to protect them, yeah, and not put them in harm's way. But our job really is to clear our own crap. Yeah. Our own traumas. And exactly like what you said. So if I want something for my child and, I was bullied when I was younger, so therefore I don't want him to get bullied. But that's not my job to stop him from being bullied. My job is to work on the trigger of what it meant for me to have been bullied at that age.
Yeah.
And that's the best example for my own experience. I'm my own guinea pig. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I am my own guinea pig. I do this work, but I also have to practice this work and show my clients that, hey, I'm human too, and I'm walking through exactly what I'm telling you. So I'm giving you these tools that I have because, hey, I'm going through this crap too. We all will. It's just about having the tools and knowing how to implement them so that you can thrive in life.
Because you being perfect actually doesn't resonate with your clients, because
there's no such thing as perfect.
They don't.
What's perfect? Perfect is when I'm dead. I've achieved everything. Right. I'm done. Boom. Time to go now. My time's done here. I'm not ready for my time to be done here. Yeah.
Right.
I still want to live.
Exactly.
So I'm okay clearing this shit out. Sorry, but as long as I get to live a bit longer and see my children grow. So yeah, no, totally.
So speaking of working on yourself, is there a book that's been instrumental in your personal development journey?
Oh, there's a lot, actually, a lot. I've got a few favorite authors and a few favorite mentors. Um, One of my favorite and probably my all-time favorite mentor is Dr. John DeMartini, and he's written The Values Factor. And if you have a look at that book and his work, phenomenal. And I do implement a lot of that. And I've worked with him. I've interviewed him. He's just a phenomenal teacher. And the values factor really talks about why we do what we do and how we're driven. And if we understand our own values and then identify our children's values, and we don't put our values onto others and not living in other people's values. So the values factor is an amazing, amazing, like personal development kind of growth learning book.
Yeah.
And then another one of my favorite authors and books, he's got many, but the first one was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And it's kind of personal development, but not in the form of a story. And all his books, every time I read one of his books, I'm about to finish a book called Aleph, which means the highest. It's all about spirituality and so on. But every time I've read one of his books, I am going through that in my life at the time.
Wow.
So The Alchemist I read when I moved to the UK, and I was very much, running away from my problems. And, I learned that you can't run away from your problems because they all lay within here. So, and The Alchemist was pretty much about that. And I'm like, isn't that funny? So go read his books. They're amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. So where can our listeners find you?
Okay. Where can you listen and find me? So I do hang out on Facebook quite a bit. Even though I got hacked 3-4 months ago and lost 3,000 followers. So I'm rebuilding that. But that's okay, because I am a huge believer in people find you exactly when they're meant to. Like, we found each other for a reason, right? And on YouTube. So I do have Marilou Coombe, Orchestrate with Marilou Coombe on YouTube. I put quite a few videos on there. And I've just moved recently into coaching others to do what I do. So I currently have 12 coaches going through my program to learn how to empower young people and understand young people's psychology. I have a few parents in there as well. Overall, I've had 26 coaches go previously through this program as well. And I've just started a new group on Insta called Empowered Youth Coaching. So it's for those that want to work and understand young people.
That's really awesome. I love all of that, and I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours.
Thank you, my love. I feel the same.
But we'll let our listeners go. So thank you again for being here and for all that you're doing in the world, and for teaching others and how to pass it on. And we will have another episode of Imperfect Momming for you all coming next week. And until we meet again, keep healing. Bye, guys.
Thank you.